So I've bought and sold around 10 million in real estate over the last 5 years. And today I want to talk about how to buy a flip and how to buy it correctly. I see a lot of these guys online talk about how easy flipping is. Here's the deal, it's not super hard, but you need to know what you're looking for, and it's also a shit show. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to break down the numbers on a flip that I just closed not too long ago, right before I started recording YouTube, or else I would have put it on here. Bought it for 70. Sold it for 145. This is like what I would consider a base hit. Most of my deals look like this, make 25 or so. I'm starting to get a little bit more cautious and want to make a little bit more on my deals. But you know, this make 25,000 in 4 months. You do a couple of them at a time, not too bad. So that's what I want to talk about today. With that being said, I was watching a video the other day, and in this video, it was one of the guys that, I guess he was a real estate investor, talks about how he underwrites deals. And it was like a podcast style. They asked him, so if the numbers make sense, you're going to buy the deal. And he said, no matter what, if it makes sense on paper, I'm going to buy the deal. And I want to tell you guys why I think that's a horrible idea. Let's say, for example, you buy a house. I hope you guys like my little graphics that I do here. By the way, if y'all stick around till the end, I've got something that I'm going to give away for free. It's not behind a paywall. You don't have to give me your email. So stick around. I'm just trying to help my retention a little bit. And I think this is going to be good value if this is what you're looking for, if you're looking to flip properties. So let's say you buy a house. No big deal. Everything's going good. You don't know better, but this house backs up to a double yellow road, or whatever it's called, where it's a two-way road. So 2 cars coming this way, 2 cars coming this way. And you didn't think it was a big deal, but there's a ton of road noise here. Well, all of the comparables, or the properties that you comp the property against around here, they don't back up to a double yellow road. And the wholesaler or your realtor said, these are selling for 150 per square foot, 150, which this one probably can sell for 150 per square foot. Doesn't necessarily mean that this is worth less because it backs up to a double yellow road. But what it does mean is that your exposure time is likely going to be a lot higher. So these houses here are selling in 30 days. This house here might take 90 days because it takes the right buyer. And so this is stuff that you can't just underwrite with the numbers. I mean, I guess you could. If you knew what you were looking for, the numbers would show that these comps don't back up to a double yellow road. But I think putting that out there, that if it makes sense on paper, then I'm going to buy it, is not super sound advice. Another example is, let's say you buy a property that's in a flood zone. If you didn't know better and you paid cash for that property, you didn't check if it was in a flood zone, and all the houses in the area are not in flood zones, it's going to be a lot harder to sell that property. And if you underwrite this with an exposure of, say, 30 days, so let's say holding cost-wise, you only expect 30, and you get 90, or worst case, you get a bad rehab on it, and you get 200 days, that could be bad. This is also why I don't flip luxury homes. At least here in Oklahoma City, you know, when you get into like 500, 600, 700K, that's considered luxury. I know in y'all's market, it may not be considered luxury. So look at your average price point. You know, $500,000 home in Minneapolis might sell for, or just as quick as a $200,000 home in Oklahoma. That's why it's important to know your market. But let's say, for example, you buy a luxury home for $500,000. You've got your buy side closing costs. I'm going to just say BSCC. You've got your sell side closing cost. You've got your rehab, which if you're buying from wholesalers, aka, you know, some of these big guys, they're not going to take these into account. They're just going to say, this is what your rehab is, this is what your purchase price is, this is what your net profit is. And that's why I'm making these videos, because it's far from the truth. Golly. I don't usually write that bad. Okay, so let's break down this deal that I bought here. This was in a little town called Harrah, Oklahoma. I actually live out there myself. And it's nice to know your market because nobody else wanted this deal because there weren't any comparables available, which typically don't buy a deal if there aren't any comps available. I just knew my market well enough to know that this was a deal. So it was brought to me by one of my agents. A wholesaler brought it to him for $65K. And I tell all my agents, I'll pay them a $5K fee if they bring me a deal. So $5K to my agent, that brings my purchase price $70K. I tried to negotiate it, they wouldn't negotiate with us. It was still a deal, so I ended up locking it up. So this particular deal, and I'll just see if I can put some photos on the screen. This marker sucks, so I'm gonna go red. This particular deal here, I bought with a bank, Farmers Bank. I'm not gonna hide anything from you guys. Farmers Bank here in Oklahoma City. Jackson Gray is the name of the lender. If you don't believe that I bought the deal, you guys can call Jackson up. Super good guy. And I've got my closing docs here we'll put up on the screen. But pretty much we've got all of our closing fees on here. This is what it looks like. We'll put it on the screen as well. So in here we've got a doc prep fee. We've got an origination fee. This is what you need to look for, this origination fee. This is typically going to be your most expensive fee when buying with any type of financing. The origination fee is pretty much just what the lender and loan officer make for doing the loan. And so in this case, I paid $1,248, I think. I don't know what it comes out to. I think at this time it was 1.5% of my total purchase price plus rehab. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Appraisal was $500. So we'll just do an APP. Because a lot of people, this is the problem that I see right now. Flipping is a great way to make a lot of money. But flipping incorrectly is a great way to lose a lot of money. And that's the thing, especially for if you're working a W-2 job, or maybe you're just coming out of school, you're a younger guy like me, you want to go make a lot of money. Getting into this game is very humbling because there's a lot that can go wrong, and there's a reason why I try and put my ego aside a lot. I still get humbled, just like the other day, for example. I'll tell you guys, we went out of town. You guys know, if you've watched my contractor video, don't pay contractors up front. Well, we got granite done at one of our properties, one of our higher end properties that we're about to list, and we went and I had my assistant go and look and make sure the granite was installed. I wasn't paying that much attention, could not have imagined how bad they installed this granite. And so she goes out there, confirms that they installed it, but not everywhere because it's kind of a larger home. They didn't do it in the window seals. They only did the kitchen. And so anyways, we ended up paying them and didn't realize, and here we are having to track down the contractor, which we got him back out there, and then he still did a poor job. That's a lesson learned the hard way. I still get humbled. I knew better than that. I have it in my contract video, but you know, I'm training my project manager, and between me and him, we just missed that, and it is what it is. But anyways, that's why I try and put my ego aside, because anybody out there that is flipping real estate and acting like they have it fully systemized and it's no big deal. I mean, I definitely don't want to act like I have it all figured out, because I don't. You know, we'll do probably 60 deals this year that I've either bought and closed on, or wholesale, et cetera, just off-market real estate transactions. Bought, closed, flipped, et cetera. And so by no means am I doing a ton of volume, but I'm doing enough to know that there's a lot of shit that breaks. And when it comes to scaling, as I've scaled up my portfolio, like I said, I've bought and sold around 10 million in real estate. You will scale up, or you build a system. You've got to have the system in place. You'll build it, and then you'll scale up, and then it'll break. And then you fix it, or add to the system, or change it, and then you scale up some more, and it breaks again. And it's just perpetually that way, and that's how business is in general. So I find it hard to watch these guys online that are like, my systems are perfect, I never have issues, because real estate's just a shit show. There's so many different factors that can go wrong. It's not like you're fulfilling on a product where once you have the product, you ship it, and there's not that much that can go wrong between shipping a product. When it comes to real estate, you have all the mechanicals that can go wrong. You have, what if you buy, like I said, on a double yellow road, or buy in a flood zone, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to put that out there. Anyways, we got our appraisal in here. I'm not going to go through all of these fees. I'll read them out. You know, here in Oklahoma, we're an abstract state, so we have abstracting. So $200 to the closing fee to the title company, and then $564 for title insurance that I had to pay for. And all of this added up to, let me do some quick math, $5,119 in closing costs on this deal. So anyways, you've got to factor your buy-side closing costs when you're buying a property. I talk about this a lot, but the closing costs can eat away a lot of your profit if you're not factoring it in. Closing costs and holding costs. So we have our purchase price of 70,000. I'm losing my marker here. It was 70,000, and then we have buy side closing cost of 5,000. If you guys notice, this is very similar to the how to analyze a deal video, except in that video I broke down how to analyze a rental or a buy and hold. This is going to be for flip. So we got our buy side closing cost, 5,000. So total bring to close on this deal, because this certain lender is commercial financing, and they will finance 90% of purchase plus 100% of cost, and then they finance my cost, or they finance my closing cost into the deal. Now, what's interesting about them is they base that 90% of purchase, and I found this out after the fact, they base it off of what the wholesaler is buying it for. The wholesaler in this case was buying it for like 45,000. And so I only brought 4,500 bucks to closing. I have no idea why they base it like that, but my down payment in essence was 4,500. And I'll put that on the screen so you guys can see. Also, I had a comment the other day from somebody that said banks or commercial banks won't finance single family real estate, and they won't finance under 100,000. And my response was, they may not finance for you, but they do finance for me. So there are banks out there, there are people that will finance these deals. And you know, I wonder if maybe for him it was just a skill thing, or maybe he just didn't look around enough. So don't have a limiting belief, because if I would have, I wouldn't have been able to figure a lot of this stuff out. So anyways, brought 4,500 to closing. And then we're not gonna get into the rehab a lot on this. I've got some rehab videos already on my YouTube channel, but I spent $24,000 on rehab was what I spent. We're gonna take out the down payment because this doesn't matter when we're running numbers. But so far, we've got our 70 plus 5, so that's 75, and then 80, 90, so we got $98,000 in this deal so far. I'm gonna tell you guys how I lost $20,000 on this deal, but I didn't actually. I just made $20,000 less than I thought I was actually gonna make. And it's a learning lesson that hopefully you guys can learn from me learning the hard way. I thought the square footage, I went to the county assessor, the square footage says 1,100 square feet. So it was 1,100. And if you guys know anything about single family real estate, typically it sells based off of price per square foot. So in this case, I was very confident that I could get about $160 per square foot. So about 160, because I knew the market, I knew that we were gonna do good rehab on it, and I was very confident we'd get 160. And so we finished up our rehab, and I wanted to price it at $161,000. So pretty good spread there. Now we're missing something, which is our holding cost. So let's talk about holding costs real quick. So I'll just call these holdco. So holding costs. Holding costs consist of, I'm gonna try not to get my shadow in there, a few things. You've got your interest payment, which is called IO, which I'll show you guys how to calculate. And then you've got your taxes. And then you've got your insurance. And then you've got, in my case, mowing. That's a W. And then we've got utilities on top of that. I'll put utilities here. You guys can tell I'm not very organized with the whiteboard, but this will all make sense. We're gonna bring it back over here in a second. And so, interest only payment. Let's run through how to calculate that. Super simple. You know, this bank at the time, they were giving me interest only, I believe 8%. And so when I close on the property, your interest only payment, depending on if you're closing with a hard money lender and they're giving you the funds up front to rehab, or if it's a draw schedule, which in this case, this is draw schedule. So what that means is they gave me $24,000 to rehab, so I didn't have to come out of pocket for this. The bank is gonna fund that, but I'm gonna do the work, and then I'm gonna tell them, I'm gonna tell Jackson or whatever bank I'm using, hey, I just did a $5,000 roof, or I just did $5,000 in flooring, draw it out for me. And so they'll draw it out. So then I'll go, my loan amount will go from 70,000 in essence to 75,000, and then 80,000, and then it'll continue to draw out. Now, some hard money lenders will want to draw that money out immediately. I don't personally want that. Some people like that. And once again, there's a good way and a bad way to use money. I don't think it's good to go get a hard money loan, and let's just say they did draw out this $24,000. What some people are gonna do is they're gonna take that and they're gonna go put that on a different project. They're gonna go use it on a different project. I got a call last year and a half ago or so, from another investor, and he said, hey, I've got these properties over here, and I have the draw money, but I can't draw out the money. Like I have the money to draw from, but I can't do the work to then draw from it. Long story short, that's why you should have reserves in place, but also there's a chance that he was robbing Peter to pay Paul over here. Maybe he wasn't, but I know that a lot of investors that will do this, they'll use money from one project to fund the other, and then to fund a different one, and they'll just move the money around and commingle it, which I just think is bad practice, and I wouldn't recommend getting into that practice. And so anyways, that's one reason why, is because when you have a chunk of, rehab loans of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 hit your bank account out of nowhere, you gotta have quite a bit of discipline not to go and use that elsewhere. You've got to make sure not to touch it. So I don't want those funds up front. I don't need them up front, quite frankly. I've got enough capital in my bank that I just want to draw out. I want to get paid back what I pay on a project. Second reason why is because if you draw these funds up front, the banks want you to a lot of times, because they start getting interest-only payments on that immediately. So you've got $24,000 sitting in your bank account that you haven't used yet, but the bank's getting interest-only payments. So this is just like something you learn from experience. If your banker's like, hey, we'll just draw it out up front. I mean, to each their own. I'm not saying that it's necessarily like a bad thing. That's why there's a million ways to do real estate. But you're just spending interest on this money that you wouldn't have to, which isn't a big deal on 20 grand. But when you're like me and you've got 150, 200,000 in rehab loans or rehab that you can draw from at any given time across different projects, you don't want it up front. So anyways, that does bring up another conversation that I've never really thought to have because my banks don't charge it up front, but you may want to talk to your bank and make sure that they're not going to charge you on that interest when you're not using it. Most banks won't. Everyone's different. I think there's less regulation on the hard money or private money side. So if you're using hard money, make sure to ask that up front. Hold costs, interest only payment. That was long-winded just to get back to what the interest only is. So let's just say my loan amount's $70,000, and then they're going to do 8% interest only. So that's $5,600. Then you divide that by 12 because they're going to amortize it out. That's what my interest only payment is $466 a month. So the interest only changes once again as I draw out. So it's going to go from $466 to then maybe like $550 of the payment after that. I've already calculated up what my interest only payments were. And they came out to around like $1,600, I think is what it was. So I paid total $1,600 in interest only. Then we have a little bit of taxes, insurance, and then mowing. In this case, we didn't have to mow the property, thankfully, because it wasn't summer yet. Now we're spending quite a bit on mowing. I would calculate, $50, $60 every 2 weeks. Right now it's raining like crazy in Oklahoma. Taxes. In this case, taxes in Oklahoma, and you need to know your market. Oklahoma, we're about 1.2% of purchase price that you're going to pay towards taxes. In this case, the taxes hadn't been reassessed. They reassess when you purchase a property, but a lot of times if you can be in and out quickly, they're not going to reassess immediately. So to calculate taxes, I'll take my purchase price, $70,000 times 1.12%. This is what my property tax rate is around me. It's probably going to be different depending on what municipality you're in, so make sure you double check your market. $784. Divide that by 12, that's $65 a month, and then I'm going to times that by 5 months. So I got $326 in taxes total, $326. And then insurance, I just know I use Foremost, by the way, is my insurance policy that I use on my flips. They're vacant policies. Foremost is one of the largest in the nation. I don't love them, I don't hate them. I mean, I don't like insurance in the first place. It's usually a lender requirement, and that's why I carry it. And so insurance-wise, I do $100. Just across the board if it's under $150,000. Sometimes I pay $80 a month, sometimes I pay $110 a month, but it's always right around that $100 a month. So 100 times 5 gives us $500 on insurance. So these are our total holding costs. We've got $1,600 interest only, we got $326 on the taxes, and then we got $500 on the insurance. Brings us to $2,426. Boom, we're gonna bring it over here. Let me tell you guys why holding costs are important. In the beginning, and this is where, there's a lot of guys online. I say that a lot. And here's the deal. There's a lot of guys online, and gals, guys and gals. There's a lot of people online that are teaching really good information about this type of stuff. And then there's some that aren't. You know, they'll post a photo of an $80,000 check, just like, you know, 80,000, just made 80,000. I posted a Facebook post not too long ago. It was a Facebook video before I started doing this YouTube, and it was like a $60,000 check that I had made at a title company. And it would have been very easy for me to go and flex a $60,000 check or whatever it was, but behind the scenes of that check, I was using my line of credit. And if you don't know much about a line of credit, I can call my bank and tell them, hey, I need you to draw out $75,000 tomorrow. They'll draw it out. I can go blow it on literally whatever I want. But it's still a loan and I still owe that money. A line of credit is just collateralized with other real estate. And so they're saying, here you go, here's $75,000. You're gonna pay interest-only payments until you pay it back in full. So it's not like I can just go blow it. But I bought a property and then I sold that property. And when you sell a property with a bank loan, the bank gets paid off at closing. But when you sell one with a line of credit, you just get your money back. And so I made $60,000 or $63,000. When it was all said and done, I made like $3,000 on the deal. I didn't lose money, thankfully, but it looked like I had made like 63,000 or whatever it is. You can pull it up on my Facebook. But all that to say, it's not always what it seems to be online. And you know, when it comes to the holding cost piece, it's very easy to do your first flip and to get to the very end and you make this big chunk of money, 25, 30, 35,000. And it seems like you've made all this money. But the holding costs are kind of just disappearing fees. Like they kind of sneak up on you, you know, like you don't pay attention to them, but they're there and they're coming out of your bank account every month. It's not a huge deal when you have one property, but if you ever plan to do 3, 5, 10, if you want to do it sustainably, you need to make sure that you include closing or holding costs in your figures. Anyways, so purchase price 70. We got our buy side closing of 5. We've got our rehab of 24. That puts us all in at 98. Then we got to add in this 24, 26. I think that's 100,000. I'm going to delete some of this stuff here. So that leaves us with 100,426. So I was pretty pumped up for this deal. I get all in. The end of the rehab took a little slower than I wanted because I was trying to go cheap with some of the last few finishing items like landscaping, etc. It always bites me in the ass, but took us 5 months to exit. Could have probably exited 1 month quicker than that. But either way, we're all in for a good number. I knew we were about to make a decent amount of money. So I go list it, like 161, I think is what I list at. We end up going under contract the first time, if that says anything, for somewhere in like the 165 range. So we still have our sell side closing costs, which we'll get into here in a second. And I'm a realtor, so I don't have to pay a realtor to go list my properties, but I still typically pay a realtor. I mean, almost always, if a realtor brings a buyer, I'm gonna pay them. You know, I was probably gonna make, all said and done on this deal, I was close to making like 50,000 or something like that. By the time I paid the realtor, et cetera, et cetera. I ran my numbers really conservatively. I ran them at 140,000 exit with my bank when I sent them the numbers. But I knew what I could get. Here's where I lost 20 grand on this deal. When I bought the property, I went to the county assessor and the county assessor said the square footage was like right around 1,100. But when I got the appraisal square footage, because the appraiser typically is going to appraise or is going to measure the property. When my bank, their appraiser went to measure the property, they measured it like 960 square feet, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal. It was like a difference of 150 square feet. But when you're talking in terms of price per square foot, $160, or your market might be $250, you know, some of those higher end markets, that's not uncommon. It's a big deal. It's a difference of like $20,000. And so we're under contract, everything's chugging, pretty pumped up, gonna make 50 grand. And I get a call one day and the realtor on the other end is like, hey, the appraisal came in at $140,000, $21,000 less than, or $21,000 to $25,000 less. And on top of this, I think we'd increased the price to like $166 because I was going to pay like $6,000 in the buyer's closing costs, which is pretty common right now. You need to factor that. Almost every buyer needs closing costs covered if you're in like the affordable housing or like the first-time home buyer price point, which this is. And so I went from making, you know, $50,000 down to making like 30 or even a little bit less because, you know, I've got my holding cost and my closing cost, etc. I went back to look at the appraisal. I was like, no big deal. I think the appraiser left out some square footage. Long story short, I could have figured this out when I was under contract to buy the property. And I could have renegotiated with the wholesaler and said, hey, your square footage is wrong. You guys are marketing this as 1,100 square feet, but it's only 960 square feet. I ate it. I just ended up moving forward. I wanted the deal closed. I was still making a decent amount of money on the deal, but I did renegotiate with the appraiser. And this is something that a lot of you guys may not know. You can renegotiate appraisals. I've renegotiated appraisals up $25,000, something that's coming at 160 all the way to 180,000, 185. You have to be very meticulous. You have to understand how to look at an appraisal, which we can get into in another video that's a little bit boring, but I like to dive into them. So I dove into this one. I looked at kind of the comparables that he had used. One of them was in a flood zone, long story short, so exposure time was a lot longer, and I personally thought my property was worth more. So he bumped the appraisal to $145,000. So that's where we landed, $145,000. All right, now we looked at the HUD, or the settlement statement, for when I bought the property. Now we're gonna look at the settlement statement for when I sold the property. It's a lot simpler. This is when I bought it. You see a lot more fees. This is what it looks like when you sell it. And so there's my sales price, $145,000. And in this case, so it was $7,000 seller paid credit. I tried to renegotiate that as well. The buyers needed the $7,000, so we had to pay the $7,000. I could have technically released this contract, but at this point, we've already been under contract for, you know, 3 weeks or whatever, and I was ready to go move my money into other deals. I wasn't gonna get greedy with it, you know? I've seen people get greedy in the past. If I tried to get greedy on this deal, I'm not gonna sell for more than $145,000 in the first place because my square footage is wrong. If I would have just gotten a bad appraisal and the square footage was actually the 1,100 I thought it was, then I would have went and relisted at this because I knew I could get that in this market. It went under contract in like 3 days when I listed it, but the square footage was not that. And so I knew that there were no comparables to support this price anymore. And so that was a learning lesson that I had to learn the hard way. Imagine if I would have done more on my rehab or gotten burned by a contractor on this rehab. I mean, I could have lost money on the deal. We didn't, but it's a learning lesson, especially if you're doing your first deal, that there's just so much that can go wrong when flipping real estate. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm not trying to say, don't do this, because I can promise you that it is worth it. And I've made a lot of money buying and selling real estate, but it's not a get rich quick scheme by any means. You can't get rich quick. It just takes a lot to learn all this in the first place. And you need some sort of mentor, I feel like, or you need to do a lot of market research. All the info's out there. You can learn about all of this, but sometimes it's just a matter of, like in this case, I had to learn this lesson the hard way. And now I check my square footage before I close. So that's the learning lesson with this square footage issue. So $7,000 seller paid closing. Then we had $217 in doc stamps. Not a big deal. And then we had $3,625 as a buyer's agent commission. And then we had $575 for abstracting fee, $200 for closing fee, $65, my handwriting's gonna get a little bad here, $65 for a doc fee to the title company, and then another $155, and then $100, and those were just kind of silly fees. And then I agreed to pay a $325 home warranty up front to the buyer when we went under contract on the deal. So now let's add up all these numbers. So we've got $7,000 plus $217 plus our $36.25. This is gonna be a big fee on the sell side. So you gotta factor in that buyer's agent commission. And then $575 for title fee, and then another $200. You can see how these little fees add up, and they add up quickly. and it's just kind of getting feed together. So to sell this property cost me $12,262. So now we've got 100,426. So let's take our 100,426, and then we've got 12,262. So we're gonna add these together. 100,000. This doesn't even make sense how I wrote this out, but you guys can tell I didn't go to college. So we're all in 112,688. Then we're gonna subtract out our 145,000. So it's a $32,312 net on this. That's how I run the numbers. Just to summarize, let me flip this thing around here real quick. Make this really simple for y'all. I hope that doesn't get cut out. That's about as chaotic as real estate right there. That's kind of what real estate reminds me of. So you've got your purchase price, and then you've got your buy side closing costs, and then you've got your rehab, and then you've got your holding cost, and then your sell side closing costs. This is really what goes into a deal for the most part. So what am I going to do with that 32,000, et cetera, because I'll have people in my comments that say you're going to have to pay half of it in taxes. I'm not, because I buy real estate. So I'm going to take the money that I made, so my 32,322 or whatever it was, and I'm going to move it into my next deal. And that's exactly what I did. And then I'll continue to move up and move that into my next deal. And then I'll buy like a multifamily like this. This is what I'm looking for right now. And I'll use that and do what's called a cost segregation, cost seg, and I'll be able to write that off on my taxes. That's what I love about real estate. You just have a lot of leverage. I can spend $10,000, so if I take 10K, I can buy a $100,000 house. And hypothetically, if I do a cost segregation on that house and I pull all of the depreciation, so the IRS says you can pull the depreciation. If I pull all that depreciation, I might be able to save 30K on my taxes with my $10,000 investment. And this is why I love real estate, because you can't do that with anything else. You can't go buy $10,000 in stocks and then write off $30,000. You could, put $10,000 into a Roth IRA and write off maybe the $10,000, but you're not going to get that leverage there. And so you get a lot of leverage. By the way, I'm not a tax professional, so make sure to talk to your tax guy, but per my tax guy, this makes sense because I'm a full-time real estate professional. Anyways, with all that being said, right now the market is not bad. It's not great. There's always going to be different factors that we're fighting against. Back when I was buying real estate back in like 2021, I didn't know what I was doing, but you really could have bought anything at the time, at least here in Oklahoma, and you'd be doing really well today. Home prices have just risen quite a bit. And that's for most of the country as well, but there are a few markets that are starting to go down. Read yesterday that Cape Coral's down 18% in the last 3 years, Cape Coral, Florida. And that's a big tech market, and so when I'm buying real estate, and this is why, just to go all the way back full circle, it's not just about the numbers, in my opinion, because Cape Coral, Florida, if you're in that market and you're buying just by the numbers and you're not watching the economics and the different factors at play, you wouldn't realize that the industry is pegged on mainly tech. And now that tech is declining in the United States, right with where our economy is at, that area is not doing well. Houston's following, and there's going to be other markets to follow as well. But I can tell you one thing, I plan to keep making money in real estate. That's why I focus on affordable housing, because my play is if I buy a property for $50,000, and let's just say I go, I plan to spend 30 and I'm all in 70K, like good, okay, I'll sell it. If I can't sell it, then I'll rent it. Let's say I spent more than 70, I'm in 100K. I'll sell it still, and so you got to make sure that your numbers make sense and that you're buying the house correctly. If you buy the house correctly, you'll be fine at the end of the day. I can do a price reduction on any property I have listed and sell it tomorrow, I may only make 5 or 10 grand, but I'm not gonna lose money. And that's never my intention. I've yet to truly lose money on a deal. I'm sure it will happen at some point. You know, you do enough deals and it's gonna happen. I got a little cocky over the last couple months, bought up a bunch of deals without doing my full due diligence. And thankfully they worked out. I was able to seller finance some of them at high interest rates so I can cash flow from that. And then we flipped the other ones. But it was like a reset of like, okay, the market is not just going up, up, and up anymore. You know, we've got to be careful with what we buy, where we buy, because days on market are increasing, inventory is increasing, and once again, it's not just about the numbers. There's a lot more factors at play. So if you watched my last video, I've got a rehab calculator, a rehab calc, and I'm not going to hide this behind anything. I just want more retention from my videos, hopefully reach some more people and help others that are looking to buy, sell, and hold real estate. So I've got my rehab calculator. I've got a due diligence checklist, a DD. I'm gonna give this away for free. So if you guys don't have my rehab calculator, drop me a like, drop me a subscribe please, and a comment, and then shoot me a DM on Instagram. Follow me on Insta too if you can. And I'll get you this rehab calculator, I'll get you a due diligence checklist. I've got my contractor guide that I can give you guys. It's my full template that I use with my contractors to make sure that we all stay working together and working towards the same goal, and so I don't get screwed and they don't get screwed either. Anyways, hope this adds value. I'll catch you guys on the next.